Good morning and welcome to Newsline, live from the News First studios in Colombo. And as usual, I have with me Mr. Bandula Jayasekara, senior journalist, diplomat, and here with us this morning. How are you?
Good morning, Faraz. How are you?
Good, thank you. And you?
Good.
Good?
You seem to be, having a big file with you today.
File, yes, I have a file on most things. They have a file. We all have files.
So you're like Jayawardene and Mahinda Rajapaksa carrying big files.
Actually, I thought it was like Mahinda Rajapaksa only, really, because he said he had files, and then the others said they have files, and it's all about files.
I hope we can find out when the program gets on what's inside that file.
Absolutely. In the interest of right to know, we have a file, and we'll let you keep watching. And also, good morning to our guest, Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe, the leader of the Liberal Party.
Good morning, Faraz.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
And do you have files this morning?
I have got a file.
Good.
And I have also got facts in that file, which
Wonderful.
I think the public should know.
Right.
I don't think we should just talk about files, which are telling people exactly what is in the file.
Right. We'll come to that in a minute. I noticed that these tenders seem to be in play now. But likely, we see that CBK is lending her support to the other side, so to speak. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think it's nothing unusual, right? She left her mother's party, the party founded by her parents.
Mm-hmm.
She's been doing her rounds in the past, so she hadn't stuck by her party throughout, so I don't think it's strange.
So we can't take her seriously then?
Well, let the people decide that for us.
Then there's the coal tender, 51 billion. Making its round. What I find unusual is we're in a sort of a very temporary government now.
Yes.
Because of this, because the election, Parliament is dissolved and so on. Should they be making such key financial decisions at this time?
I don't think so, because you should wait till the new government is elected and then move on with these projects, because people can see this as like carrots for elections, and there could be lots of doubts.
Well, we had the former Minister of Economic Development, Basil Rajapaksa, who's been taken to court and is now on bail for allegedly violating some rules, and that could be constituted as electioneering.
Yeah, people should practice what they preach.
Yes, that would be helpful, to practice what you preach. That's not going to be the quote for the day, is it, Bandula? What do you have to say about, what are your thoughts on Mahinda Rajapaksa's security? His team are now asking for increased security. 105 people, isn't that big enough?
But for us, we have discussed before, I think, during this program, because we should follow the Indian example. We should categorize, irrespective of the former presidents, and they categorize like they have up to A to Z. They categorize, and they have a proper system to provide security. We have completely undesirables who have got so much of security. It should be decided on the threat levels, not otherwise. Not because somebody is important or somebody is somebody's friend. That should not be the case, so we could learn from our neighbor on that.
And this Tajuddin matter continues to make the news. The latest is that his grave is being given protection. So we have the former president who is alive and who wants increased protection, and we have the unfortunate young man who's buried. And he's not being allowed to rest in peace, is he?
Yeah, that's what I think we are known as land like no other, or the small miracle, or the miracle of Asia, or even say wonder of Asia. That's what I think we call ourselves.
There are serious matters that need to be addressed. And also today, I bet you didn't know this, today is the day that the Prime Minister and the President are going to formally declare open the Colombo, the highway, the Central Highway. It used to be called the Northern Highway. It's been rebranded.
As the Colombo Highway.
No, it's now called the Central Central Highway.
Number one, I don't know why it was the, we were supposed it should be known as the Northern Highway. This is what I feel. That was how it started. But I really thought for us that they were going to stop this, or they held it back.
Well, this first of all, its rebranding could well be work for the ad agencies, or good news for them, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, but more importantly, you're absolutely right. This particular government that has come in, they came in. Why did they come in? What was their principal mantra? Their mantra was good governance, right? Now, they came with good governance in mind, and the one thing that troubled them was the amount of money being spent on the road projects.
But for us, if you're looking back, the mandate, the person who was elected was this President Maithripala Sirisena. He came as the common candidate. People elected him. I mean, then it was his decision to appoint this government, but I think people voted him.
Yes,
to this office.
But in that manifesto, the matter of roads and the money being spent by the Rajapaksa administration troubled Mr. Sirisena and his, not his accomplice,
his Prime Minister and
his
Cabinet.
Prime Minister and so on. It troubled them so much that they actually deemed it fit to say in the manifesto, and it is there for everyone to see, it's not being made up, that the contractor undertaking one section, namely the Kadawatha to Kerawalapitiya section, they suggested that it was so inflated that 90% was actually for commissions.
Yeah, and now they are fishing in troubled waters.
Now they're not even, it's more than, this is a blatant abuse of the system. And do you know how much this was worth?
No, I would. Maybe it's inside your file.
Ah, the file, yes, it's all there in this file. Right. 157 billion rupees belonging to the people of Sri Lanka, Now, you'd think that they take a little bit of time to analyze, to go through the figures and go through whatever.
That's the normal procedure for us, so people have to follow procedure.
If I open my file and I have a document here that gives us the timeline, 157 billion rupees negotiated over a weekend. Absolutely fascinating.
Over a weekend?
Over a weekend. It says, Prime Minister's office sends a letter under the signature of its secretary to the Prime Minister on the 16th of July saying the Cabinet Subcommittee on Economic Affairs has approved committees to oversee the rates and the procurement and the financial function of the Central Expressway. Okay? None of these committees are properly constituted as per government required guidelines. Good governance. Breakdown. Between Friday and Sunday, they finalize all this.
Was it finalized at some resort down south?
Goodness knows. However, on the 20th of July, the Department of External Resources writes to the Ministry of Highways, which received the letter the next day, the 21st, finalizing the contracts and preparing the contract agreements, saying that the approval was granted by the Cabinet of Ministers for contract awarding even before the Cabinet approved the contract, which the Cabinet meeting was on the 22nd. So this is absolutely fascinating. So they knew what was coming. So they had it all prepared. The reason, by the way, Bandhule, that we're bringing this up is because it comes under the right to information. The people of this country have every right to know what's happening to their money.
Yeah.
And clearly, this abuse of the established procedure is not the preserve of any one party.
And this is not good governance.
It's not. And Professor Rajiva, you've made some comments about this, I think, on your Facebook page. So, what do you have to say? What's happening here?
I'm immensely saddened that despite the commitments with which several of us wanted to change in January, the Prime Minister seems determined to absolutely flout the mandate that was given to His Excellency the President. I think this is a case full of lies, full of deceit, and full of dishonesty. And I say this for some of the reasons you've given, but I think it's also hypocritical. You know, you cited perfectly correctly that there is only one example in this whole manifesto of a concrete allegation. You know, we've all heard about corruption. I must grant that I too thought there was corruption on the last government. I felt we had to look at it. I told Karu Jayasuriya how he should address this without vindictiveness, because the people needed their money back. That was the purpose, not hounding people for political advantage. But Karu sent me a note saying these are very nice ideas, but the culture is difficult to change. I said we were elected to change that culture, not to sit back and go for electioneering. Now the concrete line here.
Yes, what's the concrete line you have?
The concrete line, if a total of rupees 7.3 billion is spent per kilometre on the construction of the Kadawatha-Kerala-Pitya highway, the amount pilfered is 5.2 billion.
Right.
The claim is that 90% is pilfered. Now, to give you some facts.
Where is it going, Raju?
Well, it wasn't pilfered.
Yeah.
That's the whole blooming point. The contract was for about 66 billion. Ranil Wickremesinghe claimed that he had negotiated it down and saved 30 billion. He said nearly 40%. It's all cited in the Daily News.
Yeah.
But the report indicates how this so-called saving was made. It was by cutting down the highway. A chap called Mr. Fernando, who did a recommendation saying you don't need so many lanes, you don't need provision for so many lanes, you can reduce the height of the culverts and the breadth of the culverts. You can cut down one of the interchanges. So in this way, he suggested that instead of 66, it should come down to about 33. And then he said you could perhaps reduce by 25%, but he also said that the BOQ, the rates in the BOQ, were perfectly acceptable.
Correct.
Now, what does Mr. Wickremesinghe do, having made this boast to the people, that says he'd saved 40%?
Maybe we should ask Bandula what he thinks Mr. Wickremesinghe said or did.
It's
difficult
for me to say what he thinks and what he thought
you may have
and what he'll do. It's difficult for me.
The point is that the Prime Minister said, the Prime Minister, this is the Prime Minister of this country, said, I have been instrumental in saving 30 billion, nearly 40%. Absolutely fantastic.
But not 90%, remember.
But it was not 90%.
But it should not be on paper, just the paper alone.
Everything is here in this file. We've got files.
No, what I meant is that you should save it for the people, not just to say,
yes, but the point is, what did he do with the 30 billion that was saved? Did a note be sent to the Treasury to say we've saved 30 billion, pay the contractor 66 minus 30, 36? No, he didn't do that.
Then what did he do?
He awarded the contract to the same contractor for the same price and at the same rate. You'll say to me, well, how?
Why?
Well, he changed the 6-lane to 4-lane. It's like you get a contractor to build you a 6-story house. You do your little trip to Australia and you come back and you say, hey dude, I've only got 4 floors now. Where's my 2 floors? And where's my swimming pool and where's my whatever? And he says, well, sir, you wanted to save money, so I thought I'll reduce it. So he says, okay, where's my money then? Where's the balance? So I built you another little cottage on the side with the extra. That's fine if you did it.
That's in the file.
It's in the file. Now, what they should have done is they used the same money to award the same contractor another section of the highway.
Yeah,
Now, there was no tender. There was no tender. So where is good governance? And let me read to you, this is a note to the Cabinet of Ministers. It says, the date is the 30th of March of this year. Unsolicited proposals in general should not be accepted as a matter of policy. In the future, all proposals should follow the guidelines on government tender procedure issued in 1998. But here we have on the 30th of March, they're saying this. And over a weekend in July, they do award, it's an unsolicited bid.
And for us also, I'm also surprised, why a weekend? Why during a weekend? I mean, it's supposed to be a holiday, or it's election time, true. But why a weekend?
But Rajiv, I want to ask you this. This note to the Cabinet of Ministers is signed by Ranil Wickremesinghe. He's the Minister of, apart from being the Prime Minister, the Minister of Policy Planning, Economic Affairs, Child, Youth and Cultural Affairs. Nowhere does it say that he is the Minister of Highways.
But he's the Prime Minister.
Basically, as some of his people told me, he thinks he knows everything.
Oh dear.
Compared, I suppose, to some of the officials whom he has appointed to high ministerial posts, he does know a little bit more. But he does tell lies. Now, you brought up the point as to how he used this money. First place, the cabinet paper does not mention what the savings are. There's no figure given.
That's right.
He just says the contractor offered to do a stretch of the Colombo-Kandy, the Central Expressway as it's now called.
Yeah.
In that cabinet paper,
Right.
he says that funding for the rest will be got from the Chinese Exim Bank.
Yeah.
There is a minute of the Economic Sub-Affairs Committee, which he chairs,
Yes.
saying that the Exim Bank has agreed to fund this.
Yeah.
This is indicated to Cabinet.
Yeah.
That too is a lie, because when they finally approved this mad bill of quantities, which was 2 weeks later, he says they have already written to the Exim Bank to ask for a loan. But in fact, the External Resources Department, in the letter you cited, says they need information in order to start the process.
Rajiv,
one of the things I think should be done is we should check with the Chinese embassy whether Mr. Wickremesinghe had any right to tell the cabinet to minute in the Economic Sub-Affairs Committee meeting that the bank had agreed, because why on earth would the Chinese government want to grant this sort of loan when they were so absolutely insulted in this manifesto, claiming that 90% was going to...
And Rajiv, didn't the then opposition oppose the Chinese Exim Bank, and then also the Prime Minister, when he said that he is going to scrap this Port City project. He was opposed to all this.
But let's focus on the today, because today the Prime Minister is now on his way to the location to formally declare open this project. It's been cooked in the cozy confines of 48 hours. 157 billion. Is this, Professor, is this another bond scam in the making?
Well, I think it's as bad. I think it's clearly a case of dishonesty multiplied, and dishonesty springing from the Prime Minister himself.
But he's taking the President along. The President is also joining this.
I think the real problem is that the President is now completely isolated. I used to think earlier that there were at least 1 or 2 people in the cabinet who tried to withstand the UNP juggernaut. For instance, Champika Ranawaka. But all this is done after the election is announced, and poor Champika, with poor Ratanathera, who I think is sincere about honesty at any rate, they've all jumped on this bandwagon, as they call it. And I think the only thing that motivates them is what also motivates Chandrika Kumaratunga, which is hatred of Mahinda Rajapaksa. And while I think some of us certainly believe that there was a case for controlling what was happening over the last couple of years, I don't think it needs to be so personal. And I think what has happened now is that they are focusing on one person, and this is a blatant lie about that, the only concrete evidence. And now they're doing the same sort of thing, hoping that by shouting that the last government was corrupt, they can get away with corruption.
But Rajiv, the sad thing is, it's a president, the people elected President Maithripala Sirisena. Should he take a tougher stand? Because finally all this blame will go to him, unfortunately. So he should take a tougher stand, because, okay, we have the elections coming on the 17th, but it is the president who is ruling this country.
Well, I think the real problem here, if I might say so, is that the president finds himself isolated in cabinet. He has a prime minister who doesn't listen to a word he says. I think he was rather relying, way back in January, that this would be a national government with the SLFP represented. I've already pointed out that Chandrika Kumaratunga completely sold the pass. The SLFP was not put on the National Advisory Council. Who was on the National Advisory Council? Chandrika Kumaratunga. There was no committee as pledged in the 100-day program to appoint a committee to go into electoral reform consisting of all parties. None of that was done. And then, when they actually inducted some SLFP people into the cabinet as SLFP, the leadership of the SLFP wasn't consulted. They put in fairly junior people, none of whom were in a position to stand up to the Prime Minister. That is why, after there was a decision not to strip the presidency of all powers, Ranil and Jayampati claimed that the cabinet had agreed to say that the president must always act on the advice of the Prime Minister. And this was, I think, an absolute betrayal. But I think the president was in a difficult position because he had promised to appoint Ranil Wickremesinghe Prime Minister.
Yeah, but then the president can go to the people and the masses, says that I came for good governance, help me, because the people are with him.
But I think that's what he has done, to be fair. In his address to the nation, the president made it very clear that he told the Prime Minister, he advised him, it was how the translation came out, that he advised him that it would be in his best interest to change the governor of the central bank.
But for us, sometimes advice alone wouldn't help.
You'd
have
like
to
see
order, you have to instruct. Advice alone.
You'd like to see forceful action.
I wouldn't say forceful. Instructions and orders. I wouldn't say force.
Right. Okay, the other point, back again to this matter where we've got the file. Here, I have the file, okay? Now, the other thing to bear in mind is there is the small matter of the Attorney General of this country. His advice to the cabinet, to the ministry, was that letters of cancellation should be sent to these contractors because the MOU had lapsed and there was therefore no legal basis to carry on. Now, the Prime Minister, unusually writing to the cabinet, not in a capacity as the Minister of Highways, but in the capacity as Prime Minister, hasn't told his cabinet colleagues about this advice received from the government lawyer, the Attorney General. Why? Why do we have why do we have a Minister of Highways then?
Yeah, so that was the, like you mentioned, that this government or the president was elected for good governance. So you should really practice and follow this, because these were the allegations against the previous government. So things have to change, and they have to follow this, and then otherwise you continue to hoodwink the people.
How do we move forward? Do we lobby the Prime Minister? Do we lobby the Minister of Highways? How do the people get redress on this issue? What can they do?
I think the answer is pretty obvious. We need to strengthen the president, who said very clearly that he wants to strengthen the SLFP.
Yeah.
I think it's very clear that we need to make it obvious that there are lies and frauds and deceit going on. I don't think the whole UNP is involved. I have to say that, the central bank issue, when Kabir Hashim and Malik Samarawickrama went to the bank to pressurize the governor,
yes,
Iran Vikramatne, whom I still believe is a very honest guy, said to me, I wasn't told about the meeting, I didn't go for that meeting. And I think Iran would be horrified by this. But let me say one more thing. You talked about the Attorney General. Now we have multiple attacks on the Attorney General. Sujiva Senasinghe has attacked him. Arjuna Mahendran has attacked him. And I think we have to recognize that he is one of the most honorable people to occupy that post. So,
can the governor of central bank attack a fellow official? How can he attack the Attorney General?
Well, he did it in a very polite fashion. He basically said the Attorney General hadn't done his job properly. Sujiva was even worse. But this brings you to the letters. The cancellation that was advised by the Attorney General was, as you said, because the contracts had lapsed. What Ranil instead told the Cabinet was that though the contracts had lapsed, there were claims for the startup costs, which is true in the contract. But he never said what those costs were. Instead, he said that the compensation for the cancellation, he was going to give them this other bit. This other bit has a few kilometers built out of what he calls savings from Kerala Pitya Kadavatha. And then this other massive contract is the one that you said was negotiated over a weekend. The rates in that contract are substantially higher than those that the same company had offered 6 months earlier.
As we are running out of time, very quickly, people are, we spoke about this last week on the show as well, about debates, live or televised debates. Would you debate this?
I would be delighted to debate it with anyone, the Prime Minister, any of his sidekicks, Malik Samaravikrama, who I don't think would ever face the press.
He has no locus standi, as they say.
Well, he's the chief advisor to the Prime Minister and according to all accounts the chief agent for a lot of these deals. I told him last November, I said, Malik...
Are you saying that with responsibility?
Yes, I say with responsibility because he came as chief advisor to the central bank. I told him in November, I hope you guys are not going to put a crook like Marapana back in cabinet. I mean, and he said to me, I said this to him, and his answer to me,
because we don't give them the right and to
bring them to a debate.
Let me
but he said, don't blame Marapana. I know the man who was responsible. He didn't give me the name, and the simple answer is all this has been tolerated by this UNP hierarchy, and I think the answer is very simple. Ranil may be honest about not making money for himself. I should hope so, because his grandmother and I would be horrified if he were crook, but he makes it for his party.
We need to ask you, yes or no, were you ready to debate this?
Anyone who comes, Malik, Kabir, Ranil.
Anyone.
And don't forget the secretary to that ministry was sacked, apparently because he refused to make payments that the hierarchy tried to order him to make.
We've been speaking about great wealth and big money, the public's money this morning, 157 billion and so on. But I'd like to ask you to consider this. Poverty is not an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of fellow human beings. With thanks to Nelson Mandela, that is. I wish you a very good morning and God bless.